Hey, thank you for joining Shelby and me. We are starting chapter 2 of October Sky. The title of this chapter is Sputnik. I was 11 years old when the captain retired and my father took his position. The captain's house, a big barn-like wood frame structure and the closest house in Coalwood to the tipple, became our house. I liked the move because for the first time I didn't have to share a room with Jim, who never made any pretense of liking me or wanting me around. From my earliest memory, it was clear my brother blamed me for the tension that always seemed to exist between our parents. There may have been a kernel of truth to his charge. The story I heard from Mom was that Dad wanted a daughter. When I came along, he was so clearly disappointed and said so in such certain terms, she retaliated by naming me after him. Homer Hadley Hickam Jr. Whether that incident caused all their other arguments that followed, I couldn't say. All I knew was that their discontent had left me with a heavy name. Fortunately, Mom started calling me Sonny right away because she said I was a happy child. So did everybody else, although my first grade teacher changed the spelling to the more masculine Sonny. Mr. McDuff, the mine carpenter, built me a desk and some bookshelves for my new room, and I stocked them with science fiction books and model airplanes. I could happily spend hours alone in my room. In the fall of 1957, after 9 years of classes in the Coalwood School, I went across the mountains to Big Creek, the district high school, for the 10th through the 12th grade. Except for having to get up to catch the school bus at 6:30 in the morning, I liked high school right off. There were kids there from all the little towns in the district, and I started making lots of new friends, although my core group remained my buddies from Coalwood: Roy, Lee, Sherman, and Odell. I guess it's fair to say there were two distinct phases to my life in West Virginia: everything that happened before October 5th, 1957, and everything that happened afterward. My mother woke me early that morning, a Saturday, and I had better get downstairs and listen to the radio. "What is it?" I mumbled from beneath the warm covers. High in the mountains, Coalwood could be a damp, cold place even in the early fall, and I would have been happy to stay there for another couple of hours at least. "Come listen," she said with some urgency in her voice. I peeked at her from beneath the covers. One look at her worried frown and I knew I'd better do what she said, and fast. I threw on my clothes and went downstairs to the kitchen where hot chocolate and buttered toast waited for me on the counter. There was only one radio station we could pick up in the morning, WELC in Welch. Usually, the only thing WELC played that early was one record dedication after the other for us high school kids. Jim, a year ahead of me and a football star, usually got several dedications every day from admiring girls. But instead of rock and roll, what I heard on the radio was a steady beep, beep, beep sound. Then the announcer said the tone was coming from something called Sputnik. It was Russian, and it was in space. Mom looked from the radio to me. "What is this thing, Sonny?" I knew exactly what it was. All the science fiction books and Dad's magazines I'd read over the years put me in good stead
Dead to answer.
"It's a space satellite," I explained. "We were supposed to launch one this year, too. I can't believe the Russians beat us to it." She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup. "What does it do?" "It orbits around the world, like the moon, only closer. It's got science stuff in it, measures things like how cold or how hot it is in space. That's what ours was supposed to do, anyway." "Will it fly over America?" I wasn't certain about that. "I guess," I said. Mom shook her head. "If it does, it's going to upset your dad. No end." I knew that was the truth. As rock-ribbed a Republican as ever was allowed to take a breath in West Virginia, my father detested the Russian communists, although it should be said not quite as much as certain American politicians. For Dad, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the Antichrist, Harry Truman the Vice Antichrist, and UMWA Chief John L. Lewis was Lucifer himself. I'd heard Dad list all their deficiencies as human beings whenever my Uncle Ken, Mom's brother, came to visit. Uncle Ken was a big Democrat, like his father. Uncle Ken said his daddy would have voted for our dog Dandy before he voted for a Republican. Dad said he'd do the same before casting a ballot for a Democrat. Dandy was a pretty popular politician at our house. All day Saturday, the radio announcements continued about the Russian Sputnik. It seemed like each time there was news, the announcer was more excited and worried about it. There was some talk as to whether there were cameras on board looking down at the United States, and I heard one newscaster wonder out loud if maybe an atomic bomb might be aboard. Dad was working at the mine all day, so I didn't get to hear his opinion on what was happening. I was already in bed by the time he got home, and on Sunday, he was up and gone to the mine before the sun was up. According to Mom, there was some kind of problem with one of the continuous miners. Some big rock had fallen on it. At church, Reverend Lanier had nothing to say about the Russians or Sputnik during his sermon. Talk on the church steps afterward was mostly about football team and its undefeated season. It was taking a while for Sputnik to sink in, at least in Colwood. By Monday morning, almost every word on the radio was about Sputnik. Johnny Villani kept playing the beeping sound over and over. He talked directly to students across McDowell County about how we'd better study harder to catch up with the Russians. It seemed as if he thought if he played us his usual rock and roll, we might get even farther behind the Russian kids. While I listened to the beeping, I had this mental image of Russian high school kids lifting the Sputnik and putting it in place on top of a big, sleek rocket. I envied them and wondered how it was they were so smart. I figured you got about 5 minutes or you're going to miss your bus, Mom pointed out, breaking my thinking spell. I gulped down my hot chocolate and dashed up the steps past Jim coming down. Not surprisingly, Jim had every golden hair on his head in place, the peroxide curl in front, just so, the result of an hour of careful primping in front of the medicine chest mirror in the only bathroom in the house. He was wearing his green and white football leather jacket and also a new button-down pink and black shirt, collar turned up. Peg chino pants with a buckle in the back, polished penny loafers, and pink socks. Jim was the best dressed boy in school. One time when Mom got Jim's bills from the men's store in Welch, she said my brother must have been dropped off by mistake by vacationing Rockefellers. In contrast, I was wearing a plaid flannel shirt, the same pair of cotton pants I'd worn to school all the previous week, and scuffed leather shoes, the ones I'd worn the day before playing around the creek behind the house. Jim and I said nothing as we passed on the stairs. There was nothing to say. I would tell people some years later that I was raised as an only child, and so was my brother. This is not to say Jim and I didn't have a history. From the first day I could remember being alive, he and I had brawled. Although I was smaller, I was sneakier, and we had battled so many times over the years that I knew all his moves, knew that as long as I kept inside the swing of his fists, he wasn't going to kill me. By the fall of 1957, Jim and I were about 2 months into a period of uneasy truce. Our last fight had scared us both into it. It began when Jim found my bike lying on top of his in the backyard. My bike's kickstand had collapsed. I probably hadn't levered it all the way down, and my bike had fallen on top of his, taking them both down. Furious, he carried my bike to the creek and threw it in. Mom was over in Welch shopping, and Dad was at the mine. Jim stomped up to my room, where I was lounging on my bed reading a book, slammed open the door, and told me what he had done and why. If anything of yours ever touches anything of mine again, he bellowed, I'll beat ever-loving hell out of you. How about right now, fat boy? I cried, launching myself at him. We fell into the hall, me on the inside, punching him in the stomach, and him yelling and swinging at the air until we rolled down the stairs and crashed into the foyer, where I managed a lucky hit to his ear with my elbow. Howling, he picked me up and hurled me into the dining room, but I got right up and hit him with one of Mom's prized cherrywood chairs, breaking off one of its legs. He chased me into the kitchen, whereupon I picked up a metal pot off the stove and bounced it off his noggin. Then I made for the back porch, but he tackled me and we fell through the screen door, ripping it off its hinges. We wrestled in the grass until he got up and then leaped back on top of me. That's when I felt my ribs creak. My chest hurt so bad I started to cry, but I didn't say anything, mainly because I couldn't breathe. His leg was in my face, so I bit him as hard as I could to make him get off me. He screamed and jumped up while I rolled over onto my back and gasped for air. My ribs felt like they were caved in. Blood flowed from my nose. A knot on Jim's head was rising, and there was going to be a nice purple welt on his leg. We managed some real damage to each other and knew we'd gone too far at last. When Mom came home, she found our bikes parked neatly beside each other in the backyard, and Jim and I sitting innocently together in the living room. Jim had his hand on his head, idly cradling it while he read the sports page of the Welch Daily News. I was sitting nearby watching television, trying not to scream from the pain each time I breathed. My ribs ached for a month. The dining room chair was back in its place, well glued. Jim and I washed it for days to keep anyone from sitting on it until it dried. The dogs got the blame for the screen door. Either Mom never noticed it or chose not to mention the dent in her pot. Jim was already at the bus stop while I was still rushing around getting ready. I was in and out of the bathroom in 2 minutes, flat, pausing only to brush my teeth and run a wet hand through my hair. I had my mother's hair, black, thick, and curly. She had started turning gray in her 30s, so I knew that was likely to happen to me too. It didn't look like I'd gotten anything from Dad's family tree. Mom said I was a lavender, like her, through and through. Dad never argued with her about it, so I guessed it was so. That was fine with me. The Hickams always seemed a nervous bunch to me. Dad and his brother Clarence and sister Benny never seemed able to quite settle down, always jumping up to walk real fast to wherever they were going and talking fast too. The Lavenders were a more relaxed bunch, although Mom's father, my granddaddy, was shot in the arm crawling into some lady's bedroom while her husband was supposed to be working the hoot owl shift over in Gary. My mom said her mama helped her daddy put his coat on while his winged arm healed. Mom also said granddaddy would have gone naked out in the snow before she would have helped him. On the first school day after Sputnik, I threw on one of Jim's hand-me-down cotton jackets, grabbed my books off the banister, and snatched the brown bag lunch Mom held out for me at the front door. I had to run for it. The big yellow bus was already at the stop in front of the Todd's house, and Jack Martin, the driver, waited for no one. He watched sourly, an unlit cigar clamped between his teeth, as I scrambled aboard an inch ahead of the closing doors. "Any later and you'd be walking, sonny boy," he said. I knew he wasn't kidding. Jack ran his bus in dictatorial fashion.